Ever heard of MedMen?
A new gold rush of sorts has kicked off in California.
At day one of recreational pot sales at MedMen, they're hoping lines multiple city blocks long will help them cash in on what researchers project to be $5 billion in newly legal pot sales.
Now, last month, a U.S. licensed cannabis firm called MedMen, not to be confused with MedMen, executed a reverse takeover to become a publicly traded company in Canada.
MedMan 40, and it was like a riff on Andrew and my last names, because I'm Beer Man and he's Maudlin, and it was Modman, and then it became MedMen, and then that became MedMan. We were the first cannabis unicorn, first $1 billion valuation in cannabis history in the U.S.
We represent a $1 billion marijuana company.
Welcome, everyone, to undoubtedly the most high-tech marijuana factory in the world. For me, every day I wake up, I'm intent on building the biggest marijuana brand in the world, the biggest marijuana brand in the world, the biggest marijuana brand in the world, the biggest marijuana brand in the world.
This content was created solely to provide commentary and analysis on matters of public interest. All opinions expressed are those of the creator. Please do not contact or harass any individuals mentioned or depicted in this case study on behalf of the creator or anyone else, including yourself. A book and a docuseries about this case are scheduled for release in 2025. This case study is independent of and unaffiliated with those projects. Thank you. Imagine your 34-year-old self seated in your corporate office. Your office is located on an unglamorous stretch of Culver City, and it's in an industrial area rather than the glitzy skyscrapers you envisioned during your childhood and college years. Manufacturers of military-grade electronics and industrial safety gear abound across the street. But don't let these modest surroundings deceive you. Just 8 years ago, you were working out of a tiny 550-square-foot duplex, dreaming of changing the cannabis industry forever. Now you've done it. Your baby has just gone public. You've created the first billion-dollar cannabis company in the United States. The Apple Store of weed, they're calling it. Your net worth has exploded into the hundreds of millions of dollars. It's all happening so fast that you can barely catch your breath. You've got money managers now, actual money managers. They want to sit down with you, show you some numbers, and discuss your portfolio. But you can't focus on what they're saying. You're even annoyed having to take this meeting. Your mind is racing with expansion plans, markets to seize, and countless opportunities that spread out before you. The money managers pull up a screen showing you your net worth. This number looks ridiculous to you. At this point, it's just numbers on a screen. They start talking about diversifying assets, risk management, but all you can think about is, I am busy changing the world. You stand up, point to the door, and say, "Get the F out of my office. I'm over here changing the world." If only you knew, in less than a year, your baby would be facing a $20 million lawsuit from your investors, charging you and your co-founder with underhanded self-dealing. Your CFO will sue the company for another $20 million, citing numerous allegations, including manipulating the company's stock price, making illegal political contributions in Nevada, and spending on private jets, luxury hotels, custom cars, and a class action lawsuit from employees will hit, citing labor law violations. What the heck happened behind the scenes of America's most promising cannabis empire? This is the case of how MedMen went from being valued at $1.6 billion to filing for bankruptcy in just 6 short years. In 2010, Adam Bierman found himself at the end of his rope, sitting in a poorly lit apartment surrounded by unpaid bills and the heavy weight of disappointment. His marketing company was barely making ends meet, bringing in only a few $1,000s a month. It was hardly surviving. The future was doubtful and the air was tense. Still, fate has an interesting way of meddling. One day, the phone rang. On the other end, an older woman with an odd request. She asked for help in marketing her medical marijuana dispensary. Bierman grabbed his best suit and briefcase to ensure he looked like a successful consultant. He didn't even own his own car, so he jumped into a car he was borrowing. Once he pulled up to the dispensary, his heart surged out of his chest. It was a long way away from the polished customers he had in mind. The smell hit him first, a strong mix of cannabis and neglect, more like a back alley drug den than a respectable business. The small 1,000-square-foot area was a disaster. Bierman's disdain quickly became intrigue as he jumbled notes on a yellow pad. He inquired of the older lady, "How many customers per day? What's your monthly revenue?" The woman replied, Around $300,000? Bierman's pen froze mid-stroke. Indeed, he'd misheard. That's annually, right? No, dear, the woman answered. That's monthly. We actually made $200,000 last month. This month's target is $300,000. Bierman sensed the ground move beneath him at that moment.
At the time, Andrew and I were running a business out of, our apartments. And when I say apartments, we weren't doing that well, and I wouldn't call it a business, a few $1,000s a month. We were definitely struggling. And I got a call from a woman in Hollywood who said that she ran a medical marijuana dispensary and wanted to meet with me. So I got in the car, put on my suit, I had a briefcase, and I showed up and I sat down in this grungy 1,000 square foot, what I would believe to have been otherwise, offensively disgusting, place of business. This woman starts to explain to me what kind of business she does. I get my yellow notepad out and I'm writing down these simple numbers and I say, how many customers a day, how many customers a month? I finally say, what kind of revenue per month are you doing now and where do you want to grow it to? And this was in 2009. She tells me she was generating $300,000 a month out of that place. And I stop her in her tracks and I say, no, excuse me, not per annum, not per year, per month. And she goes, we did $300,000 last month. I'm now getting in the car. I don't even have my own car. I'm driving back to a struggling business that I'm trying to figure out what to do with. And I call my partner, Andrew, this 24-year-old kid, and I say, what is the deal with these green crosses in these pot shops?
The dark surroundings vanished and dreams of unrealized promise took the stage. Questions and possibilities ran through Bierman's imagination. How is this possible? Why isn't everyone talking about this? Excitement drove Bierman to learn as much as he could about the cannabis industry. He came up against a wall of legal uncertainty and secrecy. Every answered question generated 3 or more unanswered questions. The lack of clarity was frustrating and exhilarating at the same time. Here was an industry crying out for professionalization. Bierman's enthusiasm was infectious. He convinced his friend, Andrew Maudlin, to join him in his green rush, founding MedMen in 2010. However, changing a semi-legal sector presented its difficulties. Every day presented fresh challenges. Banks declined to work with him. The social stigma of cannabis turned off possible employees, and they had trouble finding qualified professional service providers. But Bierman and Maudlin saw possibilities where others saw obstacles. Beginning modestly, they provided dispensaries with marketing and consulting services. Still, Bierman had high aspirations. In his future, buying cannabis would be as commonplace as buying groceries, and soon he would have 1 billion reasons to make these dreams a reality. It is now 2018, and MedMen had been operational for 8 years. They had a few stores in California and had already raised over $100 million in private equity funds. Bierman's vision was starting to materialize. Side note, I can personally remember this time as clear as day. Let me know in the comments if you were there, if you were active in the cannabis industry back in 2018. The entire cannabis industry was buzzing about California starting legal adult use sales in January 1, 2018. As a cannabis accountant during this time, we saw this as the floodgates were opening. It was speculated that California's market alone was going to be 10 times larger than the entire U.S. cannabis industry. In January 2018, Captor Capital, a Toronto-based investment firm, announced its intention to purchase a 3% stake in MedMen for $30 million. This transaction put MedMen on the map, valuing it at an incredible $1 billion. The consequences were staggering. Had Bierman and Maudlin's ambitious concept created the cannabis industry's first unicorn? The announcement sent shockwaves throughout the cannabis industry. How is it possible that a federally illegal company was worth so much? Was this proof of how well MedMen was doing and Bierman's vision coming true? Or was it a sign of irrational excitement in a new market? As the industry buzzed with speculation, critical questions emerged. What metrics could justify such a valuation in an industry with limited historical data? Was MedMen's quick expansion sustainable, or would it succumb to its own ambition? Could Bierman continue his extravagant rise while navigating a difficult regulatory landscape? In order to understand the implications of this valuation, we must first delve deeper into the complexities of business valuations in the cannabis industry. How do you value a cannabis company in an industry that's both booming and uncertain? Business valuation is the process of determining a company's economic value. It typically involves analyzing financial statements, market conditions, growth potential, and comparable companies. MedMen's $1 billion valuation in 2018 reflects the exuberance and uncertainty that characterized the early days of the cannabis industry in the United States. Many public cannabis companies experienced explosive growth and market capitalization during this period, with increases of 300 to 1,000% or more in just 12 months. This growth was primarily based on future potential rather than current financial performance, as most companies were still reporting negative earnings while heavily investing in scaling up operations. Given the high-risk nature of the emerging cannabis industry, investors were likely to require high returns, making high discount rates appropriate in valuations. This suggests while high valuations were common, they also reflect the industry's significant risk. In MedMen's case, the $1 billion valuation seems to have been primarily based on hype and projected future growth rather than fundamentals. The valuation likely reflected investors' optimism on the company's brand position and early mover advantage in key markets. The company was losing money, with net losses of $67 million in fiscal year 2018 on revenues of only $40 million. While rapid growth was expected, the valuation implied extremely optimistic projections. Several factors likely contributed to the inflated $1 billion figure. Investor excitement about the cannabis industry's potential, limited public cannabis investment opportunities at the time, MedMen's high-profile retail locations and brand, aggressive growth projections by the company, and lack of established valuation metrics for the nascent industry.
Say make money, money, make money, money, money. Make money, money, make money, money, money. Money makes the world go round. I'm the talk around town. Remy gave.
What do you do when you're suddenly at the helm of $1 billion cannabis empire? The solution, it appears, was to go big or go home. MedMen began a period of rapid expansion, fueled by investor optimism and an ambitious team. The first order of business, we must become a publicly traded company. Although Bierman was unaware of the challenges he was about to face, the company was ready for this next stage. MedMen moved forward into the Canadian public markets in May of 2018 when it bought outdoor partner Media Corporation in a reverse stock takeover. You've probably heard of this as a reverse merger or an RTO. I'll be using these terms interchangeably. This strategy let the private company list shares without going through the involved, time-consuming process usually needed for a conventional initial public offering. In a reverse stock takeover, a private company, in this case MedMen, buys a publicly traded shell company already on a stock exchange. The owners and the shareholders of the private company, MedMen, trade their shares for the public shell corporation shares. The public shell corporation will change its legal name and the members of the board of directors to reflect that of the private entity taking control. By combining into the current public company structure, the private company becomes public in less time and uses far fewer resources than would be necessary in an initial public offering. MedMen acquired Outdoor Partner Media Corporation, a publicly traded Canadian company. This let MedMen, whose activities were mainly in the U.S., become publicly traded on the Canadian Stock Exchange. This deal gave MedMen access to public financial markets, even though cannabis remained federally illegal in the U.S. So Naomi, I bet you're asking, why did they go through a reverse merger rather than an initial public offering that most of us are familiar with in the U.S.? I myself have been in public accounting, and I've taken many companies public using a traditional IPO. There were a number of benefits for MedMen to take the reverse merger route, including speed. RTOs are typically completed more quickly than an initial IPO because many of the regulatory requirements are unnecessary. Cost. RTOs are typically less expensive because they don't require an investment bank or the need to raise capital. Regulatory scrutiny. RTOs generally face less regulatory scrutiny and disclosure requirements than IPOs because the shell company already complies with public reporting requirements. Due to cannabis being federally illegal in the U.S., this regulatory scrutiny, especially back in 2018, would have prevented many cannabis companies from going public through a traditional IPO. Existing shareholder control. Existing private company shareholders typically keep more control of a public company in an RTO. Underwriting. IPOs typically involve investment banks to underwrite the offerings, while RTOs don't. After learning about this process, I thought to myself, why does any company even go through an IPO? This seems like the easiest route. There are many benefits of going through a traditional IPO, and one major benefits that may have hurt MedMen in the long run was market reception. IPOs create more investor interest and media coverage than RTOs. Thus, although the company was on a public market, going public on a foreign exchange complicates things for U.S. companies, forcing them to navigate a foreign market. This also makes stock less accessible to U.S. investors who may be uncomfortable with foreign markets. MedMen used the RTO strategy as a faster way to access public markets while avoiding some of the regulatory hurdles of a traditional IPO. This process made MedMen one of the first major U.S. cannabis companies to have publicly traded stock. At this point of the story, we have to keep in mind we have a federally illegal U.S.-based cannabis company with a $1.6 billion valuation and is now being publicly traded on the Canadian Stock Exchange, with only a few stores operational in the state of California. Side note, throughout this presentation, I go back and forth between a $1 billion valuation and a $1.6 billion valuation. Captor Capital, their investment established them as a $1 billion corporation, but on top of that, they also were able to raise 2 tranches of $300,000, which gets us the $1.6 billion number. I remember a lot of industry professionals were scratching their heads as to how all this was happening so quickly. MedMen's ambitious growth strategy saw significant expansion between 2018 and 2020. New high-end retail locations spread out across the country, each one a gleaming testament to MedMen's Apple Store aesthetic. The company's red shopping bags became a status symbol in cities from Los Angeles to New York. You can even find the iconic red bag in an episode of Keeping Up with the Kardashians. At the close of fiscal year 2018, which, side note, MedMen operated on a fiscal year rather than a calendar year. Their fiscal year ended on the last Saturday in June or the first Saturday in July. In 2018, their fiscal year end was June 30th, 2018. So at the close of fiscal year of 2018, MedMen was already operating across multiple states. The company operated 13 retail locations. California was their primary market, accounting for 92% of fourth quarter system-wide revenue, having 8 of the 13 open retail stores. In Nevada, the company opened a store near the Las Vegas airport in July 2018, just after the fiscal year ended. In New York, the company also had operations. There should have been 4 since we've already accounted for 9 of the 13 locations. Even at this early stage, MedMen had set its sights on significant expansion. The company had entered into the Florida market and signed agreements to expand into Arizona and Illinois. They also planned to enter Northern California with pending San Jose and Emeryville acquisitions. MedMen had more than doubled its retail footprint in 2019, running 32 stores spread over 9 states. California remained their core market with 13 operational stores out of 17 total licenses. The company also opened its first retail location in West Palm Beach, in Arizona, operating 3 retail locations, in Illinois, operating a medical dispensary in Oak Park, in Nevada, operating stores in Las Vegas, in New York, operating 4 medical dispensaries, including a flag shop on Fifth Avenue. Massachusetts plans for locations in Fenway and Newton pending approvals. MedMen had ambitious plans to reach 30 California locations and 12 Florida stores by the end of calendar year 2020. At this stage, MedMen was gearing up for its most ambitious expansion yet, the PharmaCann acquisition. This would more than double their presence, making sure they are visible in just about every U.S. adult use market, catapulting them into 12 states with 67 retail locations and 14 factories. The cannabis world watched to see if they can pull off this industry-defining deal. But in the world of business, rapid growth often comes with growing pains. Was MedMen about to learn this lesson the hard way? As the phrase goes, the bigger you are, the harder you fall. As an individual or entity gains popularity, prosperity, and influence, they will inevitably attract more public notice and scrutiny. You grow increasingly vulnerable to attacks from all directions, just as a big oak tree attracts both admiration and lightning strikes. MedMen was no exception to this. As MedMen was reaching its stride as the Apple Store of cannabis, legal troubles began to expose cracks in the shining image. Within the first year of achieving its billion-dollar valuation, the company found itself under attack by a trio of devastating lawsuits. The first blow came from James Parker, MedMen's former CFO, who sued in a blockbuster $20 million lawsuit in January of 2019. His explosive complaint painted a disturbing image of life inside the cannabis empire. Parker claimed the founders practiced stock price manipulation, bank fraud, making illegal political contributions in Nevada, and using company funds for personal luxuries, including private jets, personal security details, custom Tesla SUVs in pearl white Escalades, and a $300,000 salary for CEO Bierman's marriage counselor. Even more damaging were Parker's allegations about the company's culture. He claimed Bierman and Maudlin created a toxic workplace environment using homophobic and racial slurs, referring to Los Angeles City Councilman as a midget N-word, and describing an activist as a fat L-word. MedMen strongly denied these allegations, with MedMen dismissing these as silly and disgusting. The CEO said the fact that his wife is Latina and his business partner Maudlin is gay was proof that the claims of discrimination were false. But the damage to MedMen's carefully crafted image was already done. The legal onslaught continued when early investors filed suit charging Bierman and Maudlin with rampant brazen self-dealing and wrongfully stopping them from cashing in their shares. While MedMen described these as frivolous claims, the lawsuit brought up important questions about how the founders were running the business. The final blow came when MedMen's own employees filed a class action lawsuit saying that the company had broken labor laws on a regular basis. As more and more evidence of internal problems piled up, the company's claim that it gave competitive compensation and a thriving work environment rang hollow against the mounting evidence of internal dysfunction. The cases did more damage to MedMen than just drain their bank account with legal fees. Their actions destroyed the business's carefully crafted image as a high-tech store bringing legitimacy to cannabis. Instead of the Apple Store of weed, MedMen began to look more like a cautionary tale of unchecked ambition and mismanagement. The lawsuits from the CFO, the investors, and the workers showed MedMen's process and culture had major flaws. The company won the court case against Parker in 2021, but the damage was already done. The lawsuits made investors less confident, made it harder for MedMen to get the money it needed to grow, and ruined its ties with partners and vendors. As 2019 came to a close, MedMen was spending valuable time and precious resources fighting lawsuits on multiple fronts rather than putting its big growth plans into action. The company that didn't seem like it could be stopped a few months ago now looked more and more weak. The PharmaCann deal that was coming up was an even bigger problem that would put MedMen to the test like never before.
As an increasing number of states change their marijuana legislation, the FBI is seeing a public corruption threat emerge in the expanding cannabis industry. The corruption is more prevalent in Western states where the licensing is decentralized, meaning the level of corruption can span from the highest to the lowest level of public officials. With FBI This Week, I'm Molly Halpern of the Bureau.
What goes up must come down. The house of cards is crumbling. In March of 2019, Attorney General William Barr reportedly ordered the Department of Justice's Antitrust Division to investigate the 10 proposed mergers in the cannabis industry, including the $682 million merger between MedMen and PharmaCann. This order came even though staffers had determined these investigations were unnecessary and unlikely to raise significant competitive concerns. According to John Ellis, a career official in the DOJ's Antitrust Division, who testified before the House Judicial Committee, these investigations were not based on legitimate antitrust concerns, but instead on Barr's personal dislike of the cannabis industry. Ellis stated that Barr's rationale centered not on any antitrust analysis, but because he did not like the nature of their underlying business. The DOJ staff initially concluded that the cannabis industry is highly fragmented, with many market participants in states where cannabis was legal. The fragmentation meant that mergers were unlikely to create monopolies or significantly impact competition, which is the usual criteria for launching antitrust investigations. In the case of MedMen and PharmaCann merger, staff determined, quote, it was unlikely to raise any significant competitive concerns. Despite these findings, Barr directed the Antitrust Division to issue second request subpoenas, typically reserved for mergers that could create monopolies or significantly reduce competition. This process is extremely burdensome, requiring companies to produce millions of documents and significantly delaying merger proceedings. For the MedMen-PharmaCann deal, the companies were required to produce 1.3 million documents from 40 employees. This investigation found no competitive concerns, but by then we were a year into this. In October of 2019, the deal had collapsed, with MedMen citing delays of obtaining regulatory approval. During the investigation, MedMen stock reportedly lost about a third of its value. Even though the PharmaCann deal fell through, MedMen's leaders kept a positive attitude. They were here to change the world, and they remained steadfast on this goal. They could rest on the fact that they had a strong financial partner with Gotham Green Partners. With their deep pockets and strong industry knowledge, Gotham Green Partners was their lifeline, here to take them to new heights. The future was bright and green and full of hope, or so it appeared. MedMen was about to learn a hard lesson about how not everything that shines is gold, and how your anchor can turn into your noose. MedMen Enterprises was at a crossroads in May of 2019, as the cannabis business faced increased regulatory attention from the Department of Justice. Despite having other financial options available, the company elected to engage into a financing agreement with Gotham Green Partners, which in retrospect appears to have set the grounds for a series of progressively difficult financial arrangements. The Gotham Green Agreement initial conditions were especially tough, even by the standards of a high-risk cannabis sector. The $250 million facility was constructed with a high annual interest rate of LIBOR plus 6%, significant equity components via convertible notes and warrants, and tight criteria for accessing later tranches of finance. These terms reflected not only the perceived risk in the cannabis industry, but also Gotham Green Partners' considerable bargaining power. The original agreement had several key features, including a complicated multi-tranche system, which gives Gotham Green Partners considerable control over fund delivery. Conversion pricing could cause significant dilution of existing shares, extensive warrant coverage resulting in significant potential dilution, forced conversion provisions which can be used to Gotham Green's benefits, and prepayment penalties reducing MedMen's financial flexibility. As MedMen's financial situation deteriorated over time, the terms of successive financing arrangements with Gotham Green Partners looked to tighten even further. This was demonstrated by the decreasing size of the tranches and the increasing complexity of the financing arrangement. For example, the first agreement in May of 2019 called for a first tranche of $100 million. However, by the fourth quarter of 2020, Gotham Green Partners took on more control and more caution over its funding commitments. While Gotham Green Partners' backing kept MedMen afloat, it came at a cost. This cost may have contributed to the company's continued financial difficulties. This serves as a warning to business owners out there, specifically cannabis business owners, to think twice before entering into any legal agreement. Ensure that you have a reputable attorney and a CPA in place who understands your industry to help you navigate these deals, because if they are not originally drafted by you or your team, they're more than likely drafted to favor the opposing party. By the end of fiscal 2019, June 29, 2019, just over a year after going public, MedMen reported a net loss of $277 million, double the $112 million loss in the previous year. Despite raising substantial capital during the year, the company's cash position had dwindled from $79 million at the end of fiscal 2018 to about $34 million at the end of fiscal 2019. The situation deteriorated further in fiscal 2020. By the quarter ended March 28, 2020, MedMen's current liabilities exceeded its current assets by $194 million, up from $137 million just 3 months earlier. The company's total liabilities had ballooned to $735 million, nearly double the $381 million reported at the end of fiscal 2019. MedMen's cash burn rate remained alarming. The company reported negative cash flows from operations during the 9-month period ending March 28, 2020 of only $115 million. This rapid cash depletion led to debt financing and asset sales to keep the business afloat. As we started to approach August of 2020, MedMen's expansion began to slow down. The business reported to run only 25 stores spread over 6 states. This number excludes licenses that were already in the process of being sold. Because if you remembered, just a little while ago, I mentioned that they reported running 32 stores spread over 9 states by the end of fiscal year 2019. Although this is nearly double the dispensary count from the 13 dispensaries reported in 2018, it fell short of the company's estimates. Despite the impressive growth in retail presence, MedMen faced significant financial challenges. The company reported widening losses, rapidly declining cash reserves, and mounting debt. These financial pressures drew attention to the risk of rapid development and the fledgling cannabis industry and raised doubts about MedMen's capacity to continue without getting more investment dollars. By fiscal 2021, MedMen was facing severe liquidity issues. As fiscal year end, June 26, 2021, the company reported a working capital deficit of $546 million, with total liabilities reaching $682 million. Management expressed substantial doubt about the company's ability to continue as a going concern, citing the need for additional financing and uncertainty of generating sufficient cash flows to meet obligations. These financial challenges led to operational issues, including difficulty paying vendors and maintaining inventory levels. The company also began to divest assets to generate cash and reduce debt. This rapid financial decline, evident within the first 2 years of going public, underscores the risk of speculative valuation in the emerging high-growth industries like cannabis. It demonstrates how quickly a company's fortunes can change when faced with operational challenges, regulatory issues, mounting debts, and a competitive market landscape, even after achieving a billion-dollar valuation. As MedMen's financial situation spiraled downwards, the company's troubles were far from over. In our next chapter, we will introduce a new set of challenges that will further test the once promising cannabis retailer. Bierman's departure as CEO and co-founder of MedMen in early 2020 marked the beginning of an unstable era of the corporation. The organization, which was already facing financial and regulatory issues, was now dealing with a leadership carousel, knocking it off balance even further. MedMen struggled to find its footing. One can only imagine how each new face brought in new ideas and new solutions to the struggling company. Most savvy business owners know that implementing new business strategies takes time to materialize into actual business results. MedMen's turnaround strategy would be subject to constant leadership changes, preventing any of these new CEOs from fully implementing their ideas and plans. This revolving door of CEOs impeded the company's ability to develop a coherent turnaround strategy and restore investor trust. Following Bierman's exit, MedMen cycled through 5 CEOs in just 3 years. Ryan Lysick stepped in as interim CEO in February of 2020, but his tenure was brief and marked by uncertainty. Tom Lynch took over as interim CEO in March 2020. He was made permanent in July 2021. His 18-month tenure, however, did not help to turn around the company's finances. Michael Saria, a key investor and previous chairman, was appointed temporary CEO in November of 2021. While he invested over $100 million in the company, his nomination sparked concerns about conflicts of interest. Edward Record was appointed permanent CEO in April of 2022. He remained in this role for only 15 months before being replaced. Ellen Douche took over as the final CEO in July of 2023. She was faced with a corporation that was, hindsight being 2020, too far gone. This constant leadership turnover had many consequences for MedMen. Strategic inconsistency. Each CEO brought their own vision and priorities, making it impossible to carry out long-term plans. These leaders were forced to work from an area of reactionary decision-making, creating band-aid solutions because they had no time to tackle the real issues that were plaguing the company. Operational disruption. Instability at the top trickled down to every crevice of the organization. If you've ever worked in a corporate setting for an extended period of time, you've probably seen it. It looks like team leaders scrambling to align with the new vision, middle managers wrestling with changing priorities, and frontline workers braced for yet another round of new direction speeches. Constant changes in leadership made it very difficult to recruit and retain high-quality executives and employees. From my own experiences as one of the top voices in cannabis accounting at this time, I was approached in January of 2022 for 2 separate roles at MedMen. They were hiring both Senior Vice President of Accounting and Director of Technical Accounting, both of which I turned down, and several people in my network turned these positions down due to the uncertainty in the company. Eroded stakeholder price. The leadership fluctuation signaled instability to investors and partners and employees. Loss of institutional knowledge. As the corporation continues to go through several rounds of transition, from the executive team down to team leads, crucial information about the business's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats has likely been lost. While these employees left, they took with them a wealth of knowledge about the company's inner workings and crucial insights. Instead of being able to build on prior knowledge and experience, it seems like MedMen was always starting from the beginning. The industry landscape was shifting like quicksand, and MedMen was constantly jumping from strategy to strategy, never quite finding its footing. Problems with operations became the norm, and the income statement continued to bleed red ink. Instead of focusing on expansion, the corporation that once aspired to dominate the green rush appeared to focus on staying afloat. As the sun sets on MedMen's once gleaming empire, we find ourselves at the bittersweet conclusion of a cautionary tale in the cannabis industry. The company that once aimed to be the Apple Store of weed now stands as a humble reminder of the volatile nature of this emerging market. As MedMen's financial troubles reached a critical point, the company was forced to file for bankruptcy, a stark contrast to its once lofty ambitions. For many observers, this raised an immediate question: how can a cannabis company file for bankruptcy when U.S. bankruptcy laws don't apply to federally illegal businesses? The answer lies in MedMen's unique corporate structure and history. Remember, MedMen is a Canadian company that went public on the Canadian Securities Stock Exchange through a reverse stock takeover. By being a Canadian public company, MedMen can access Canadian bankruptcy protections. Meanwhile, the company entered into receivership in the United States, where most of MedMen's operations were based. Unlike bankruptcy, which is a legal process primarily aimed at protecting the debtor, a receivership is a court-appointed tool that can serve both creditors and troubled companies. In this receivership, an independent receiver was appointed to take control of MedMen's assets and manage its affairs. The receiver, acting as a neutral third party, was tasked with protecting the creditor's interests, potentially selling off parts of the business's paid debts. Richard Orman, who is a shareholder over at Buchalter Law Firm, is the receiver for MedMen and is focused on helping the creditors recover funds.
Canadian public company which recently filed bankruptcy in Canada, that is MedMen Enterprises Inc. MedMen Enterprises Inc. is now in the BIA, which is the equivalent of a Chapter 7 bankruptcy in Canada. The American parent company is called MedMen USA, Inc. I am the receiver over the assets of that company, and that company owns downstream a number of different dispensaries in 5 different states, including the entity that owns this license. This license, after review, has significant value to the creditors of this company. As my job as receiver is not to benefit the shareholders, it's not to benefit the company, it's to benefit the people that are creditors of this company, the vendors, the...
This complex legal strategy, bankruptcy in Canada and receivership in the U.S., underscores the intricate challenges faced by companies in the cannabis industry, particularly those operating across borders. It highlights the ongoing tension between state cannabis legalization and federal prohibition in the United States. MedMen's downfall was fueled by several key events: the aggressive pursuit of a $1 billion valuation, which led to rapid expansion and unsustainable spending, regulatory hurdles that caused the collapse of the PharmaCann deal, which was a cornerstone of MedMen's expansion strategy. The failed PharmaCann merger weakened MedMen's position, allowing its primary lender, Gotham Green Partners, to push for more favorable terms, including more control over funding disbursement, increased funding cost, and a more prominent role in the organization's governance. As news of the bankruptcy and receivership proceedings spread, it sent shockwaves through the cannabis industry. The company that once symbolized the potential of legal cannabis has become a stark reminder of the risk inherent in the emerging sector. The company primarily operates a handful of stores in California, which is a dramatic retreat from its former multi-state presence. Once trading at much higher levels, its stock has plummeted to zero. Up in smoke, The illusion of a billion-dollar cannabis empire is a cautionary tale for an industry still finding its footing in a complex legal and financial landscape. There remains a lingering question. Was MedMen ever truly worth $1.6 billion, or was it an illusion?